My husband's lawyer was the one who laughed first. A short, surprised bark like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then my husband joined in. Then his girlfriend, sitting in the third row in a cream-colored dress I had never seen before, covered her mouth with her hand and giggled like a teenager at a movie. The bailiff didn't laugh. The court reporter didn't laugh. And the judge, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair, pulled back into a bun so tight it looked painful, didn't even blink. "Ma'am," the judge said, leaning toward her microphone. "You're proceeding pro se." "Yes, Your Honor." My husband leaned over and whispered something to his lawyer. They both smiled. I could hear the words even though they were 10 feet away, because I had spent 11 years training myself to hear everything he said about me when he thought I wasn't listening. She can't afford a real one. Watch this. I want to back up. I want to tell you how I got to that courtroom in downtown Sacramento on a Thursday morning in early March, wearing the same navy suit I'd worn to my mother's funeral, holding a leather folder that my husband would have recognized if he'd looked at it for more than half a second. But he didn't look. He never looked. His name was Easton. I won't pretend I didn't love him once. When we met, I was 23, working night shifts at a hospital in Modesto and saving every dollar for something I wasn't ready to tell anyone about yet. He was 28, already 3 years into a job at his father's commercial real estate firm, and he had this way of making me feel like the most interesting woman in any room. He'd ask me questions about my patients. He'd remember the names of my coworkers. He'd bring me coffee at 4 in the morning if I texted him I was tired. That version of him lasted maybe 2 years. The version I lived with for the other 9 was a man who slowly, methodically, made me smaller. Not all at once. Never anything you could point to and say there, that's the thing. It was a comment about my shoes when we went to his cousin's wedding. It was the way he laughed when I told his mother I was thinking about taking a class. It was the night he came home and told me he'd told his coworkers I was a stay-at-home wife, and when I corrected him, he said, "Honey, you work part-time at a clinic? Let's not embarrass ourselves." I had stopped working at the hospital by then. I was still working, just not where he thought. The dinner where everything came apart was a Sunday in February. His mother had insisted on hosting. She lived in a 4-bedroom house in El Dorado Hills that her late husband had left her, and she ran her dinners like board meetings. Linen napkins, place cards, a seating chart printed on cardstock that she'd point to with one finger as people came in, like a gate agent. My place card was at the far end of the table, next to a chair that wasn't there. I sat down anyway. I remember the smell of rosemary from the kitchen, and I remember thinking about how my own mother used to make a roast every Sunday until she got too sick to stand at the stove, and how I hadn't been able to bring myself to make one since she passed 2 years before. Easton came in 15 minutes late with a woman. She was younger than me, not by much, maybe 4 years. She had the kind of expensive blonde hair that doesn't happen by accident, and she was carrying a small bouquet of pink peonies wrapped in brown paper, which she handed to my mother-in-law like a hostess gift. My mother-in-law took them, smiled, and kissed her on the cheek. Easton walked past me without looking at me. He pulled out the empty chair next to mine, set it back where it belonged, and gestured for the woman to sit down. "Everyone," he said, "this is Brinley." Nobody at the table looked surprised. Not his mother, not his older brother, not his sister-in-law, who I had taken to the emergency room myself the year before when she'd had a kidney stone and Easton's brother was out of town. Not one of them looked at me. Not one of them said a word. Brinley sat down. She put her hand on Easton's thigh under the table. She did not look at me either, but she smiled at his mother and said, "Thank you so much for having me. Easton has told me so much about your family. I want to tell you that I stood up. That I threw wine. That I made a scene. I didn't. I sat there and ate the bread my mother-in-law passed me. I cut my roast into small, even pieces. I let his brother ask Brinley about her job, which apparently was something in commercial leasing in San Francisco, and I let his mother compliment her on her dress, and I let Easton refill her wine glass twice before he refilled mine once. And then, about halfway through dinner, my mother-in-law turned to me. She set down her fork. She looked at me for the first time since I had walked in the door. "Sweetheart," she said. "We thought it would be easier if we all just got this out in the open." "Got what out in the open?" "Easton is going to file on Monday. We thought you should know in front of the people who love him, so you don't make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at my husband. He was eating. "I'm sorry," I said. "Am I being divorced at a dinner party?" His brother actually chuckled. "Don't be dramatic," my mother-in-law said. "We're being kind. Easton wanted to do this with respect. He could have just had you served at home," Brinley said very softly, like she was being thoughtful. "I told him we should wait until after the holidays." "It's March," I said. "After Valentine's Day," she clarified. And she gave me a small, sympathetic smile. I set my fork down. I asked one question. I asked it quietly, because there were 16 people at that table and I didn't want my voice to shake. "What about the house?" Easton finally looked at me. He had this expression he made when he was about to be cruel and wanted to seem like he wasn't. A kind of tender pity, a face you'd make at a child who didn't understand why the dog had to be put down. "Honey," he said, "the house is in my name. The cars are in my name. The accounts are in my name. You haven't worked a real job in 7 years. My lawyer says you'll get spousal support for 18 months while you figure something out. That's more than fair. My name is on the mortgage. Your name is on a piece of paper. You haven't paid into it. You can't afford a lawyer who's going to argue otherwise, and frankly, sweetheart, you can't afford one at all. Be reasonable. Take what we're offering." His mother reached across the table and patted my hand. "We've already had your things packed," she said. "They're in the garage. Easton brought them over this afternoon." I didn't answer her. I didn't answer any of them. I went out to the garage. There were 6 suitcases lined up against the wall. The matched set Easton had bought me for our 5th anniversary because he said the duffel bag I traveled with looked cheap in airports. They were full. Someone had folded my things. Not him. Probably his mother. The clothes were folded badly, but they were folded. On top of the smallest suitcase, the carry-on, was a velvet jewelry box. I opened it. My grandmother's wedding ring, the one my mother had given me the week before she died, was still inside. They hadn't taken it. I think they didn't know it was worth anything. It wasn't, really. Not in dollars. It was a thin gold band with a chip of a diamond. My grandmother had been a postal worker in Bakersfield, and she had worn that ring for 51 years. I closed the box. I put it in my coat pocket. I loaded the suitcases into the trunk of my car, one by one. Nobody came out to help. Through the kitchen window, I could see them, still at the table. Brinley was laughing at something his brother said. My mother-in-law was pouring more wine. I drove to a hotel off Highway 50 and checked in for 3 nights. I sat on the edge of the bed and I did not cry. I want to tell you I did. I want to tell you I sobbed and broke something and called a friend. What I did was open the leather folder I always kept in my work bag, the one Easton had never asked about, because he assumed it held coupons or recipes, or whatever it is he thought I did with my time. And I read through the contents of it for an hour. Then I made one phone call. "I want to tell you about that folder. When I left the hospital 7 years earlier, I didn't leave nursing because Easton wanted me to. He thought I did. I let him think it. I left because a woman I had taken care of in the cardiac unit, a retired federal prosecutor named Constance, had asked me if I had ever considered law school. I laughed at her. I was 28. I had a husband who told me I wasn't smart enough to balance the checkbook. I had a mother who was sick. I had a household to run. Constance said, "Honey, I have watched you read the same chart 3 times because you didn't trust your own first reading. Then I watched you catch a medication error that 2 doctors had missed. You don't have a confidence problem. You have a husband problem. Take the LSAT." I took it. I scored in the 94th percentile. I enrolled in a part-time evening program at McGeorge. I told Easton I had picked up shifts at a clinic. He didn't ask which one. He never asked for an address. He never came to find me. The only time he ever called during my class hours, I let it ring, and when I called him back 2 hours later, he said, "I just wanted to know what's for dinner, never mind." I graduated in 3.5 years. I passed the California bar on the first try. I had been a licensed attorney in the state of California for 2 years and 7 months on the day of that dinner. I had been practicing quietly, on contract, with a small firm in Midtown Sacramento. I handled estate work mostly, probate, a little family law when they were short-staffed. My name was on the bar registry but not on any letterhead, because my contract was nominal and because I had asked the partner, a woman named Constance who had recovered from her cardiac event and started her own practice, to keep me off the website until I figured out how to tell my husband. I never figured out how to tell him, so I just didn't. In the leather folder were the original mortgage documents for our house. The ones Easton had told me I'd never read. I had read them. The night before we closed, while he slept, I had read them and noticed that the down payment, the one his father had supposedly gifted us, had actually come through a wire transfer from a holding company I didn't recognize. I had photographed every page. I had photographed the wire confirmation. I had kept it because something about it had bothered me, and 7 years later in law school, I had finally understood why. The holding company was registered to his father's firm. The wire was structured to avoid gift tax reporting. The down payment had been treated on his father's books as a loan to the business, then written off as a bad debt the following fiscal year. Which would have been fine, except that the property, our house, had also been listed for 2 years as a depreciating commercial asset on the firm's tax filings. You can't do both. You can't claim a personal residence was a business loss and also depreciate it as a commercial property. One of those is a lie to the bank that wrote the mortgage. The other is a lie to the IRS. His father had done both. For 7 years. And every quarter, my husband, who managed the firm's properties division, had signed off on the filings. In the folder were also bank statements I had been quietly copying for the last 18 months. Statements Easton hadn't known I had access to because he had used my social security number to set up a joint money market account he didn't think I knew existed, and the bank, by law, was required to send statements to both holders of record. They came to a P.O. box I had opened in Roseville. He never wondered about the mail because he never picked up the mail. In the folder were 19 months of statements showing transfers from that money market account to a personal checking account in Brinley's name. The phone call I made from the hotel was to Constance. She picked up on the second ring. It was 9:45 on a Sunday night. "Hi," I said. "It's me. Are you free this week to be co-counsel on something?" "On what?" "On my divorce. And maybe a referral to the white-collar unit at the U.S. Attorney's Office. I have documents." There was a pause. "Where are you right now?" "Hampton Inn off 50. Stay there, I'm coming." She came. She brought a bottle of wine and a yellow legal pad and a box of tissues that I did not use. We sat at the small round table by the window, and she went through the folder, page by page. It took her 2 hours. At the end of it, she took off her reading glasses and set them down. "Sweetheart," she said, "you've been preparing for this for 2 years. 3, I said, if you count law school. Why didn't you leave him sooner?" I thought about it. "Because I wanted him to do it first. I wanted it to be his idea. I wanted his mother to be there for it. I wanted every single one of them to remember exactly what they said the night they thought I had nothing." She nodded slowly. She had spent 30 years as a prosecutor before she went into private practice. She understood patience the way other people understand breathing. "All right," she said. "Then let's give them something to remember." Easton's lawyer filed the petition on Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon I had been served at the hotel. The papers were thin. He was asking for the house, both cars, all retirement accounts, and an 18-month limited spousal support arrangement. He had attached an asset disclosure that did not mention the money market account. It did not mention the down payment. It did not mention his father's holding company. I filed my response on Wednesday. Pro se. I did not list Constance as co-counsel. I asked her not to appear on any filing. I wanted them to think I was alone. The first hearing was scheduled for a Thursday 3 weeks later. In those 3 weeks, several things happened that Easton did not know about. I met twice with a forensic accountant Constance had referred me to, a retired IRS examiner who looked at my documents and whistled through her teeth and said, "Honey, this is a Christmas present." She drafted an analysis I could attach to emotion. I met once very quietly in a conference room at the federal building with an assistant U.S. attorney from the white-collar fraud unit. She was a black woman in her early 40s named Amar Okonkwo, and she had been Constance's mentee 15 years earlier. She listened to me for 40 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Are you willing to wear a wire?" "No." "Are you willing to testify?" "Yes." "After the divorce is finalized." "Not before." "Why?" "Because I want him to spend the next 3 weeks thinking he's winning." She smiled. It was a small smile, but it stayed on her face for a long time. "We can work with that," she said. I also did one more thing in those 3 weeks. I went to the house. Easton was at work. His mother was not there. I let myself in with my key, which still worked, because he had not yet had the locks changed. I went into his office. I opened the safe. I knew the combination because I had watched him set it the day it was installed, and he did not know I had watched. I did not take anything. I photographed the contents. There were 3 ledgers in his handwriting. There was a USB drive. There was an envelope of cash that I did not count because I did not need to. I closed the safe. I locked the office. I left. I gave the photographs to Imara that afternoon. She looked at the first ledger for about 30 seconds. Then she said, "Where did you get these?" "From a safe in a house I have a legal ownership interest in. Under California community property law, I have full access to all marital assets until a court orders otherwise. There was no court order at the time these photographs were taken. I have time-stamped metadata." She looked at me for a long moment. "You went to law school?" "Yes." "Of course you did," she said. "Of course you did." So, the Thursday morning, I walked into Department 43 of the Sacramento County Superior Court at 9:15. Easton was already there with his lawyer, a man named Whit Bramwell who advertised on bus benches and had a $50,000 retainer. Brinley was in the gallery 3 rows back, in the cream dress. My mother-in-law was beside her. My brother-in-law was beside her. My brother-in-law was beside her. My father-in-law had not come, which I noticed, and which I made a small mental note about. I sat at the petitioner's table, alone. I had my leather folder and 1 yellow legal pad and a single pen. Whit Bramwell turned around and looked at me. He smiled, the kind of smile lawyers smile at people they think are about to embarrass themselves. He leaned over to Easton and said something. Easton laughed. The mistress, 3 rows back, laughed too. "All rise." Judge Maricela Calderon came in. She had been on the Sacramento bench for 19 years. She had taught a continuing legal education seminar 2 months earlier on financial disclosure in dissolution proceedings, and I had been in the audience. She had not seen me. There were 120 attorneys in that room. But I remembered her, and I remembered the way she had talked about hidden assets, and the precise tone of disgust she had used. She sat down. She looked at the bench docket. She looked up. "This is the matter of the marriage of Easton Hargrove and Whitney Hargrove. Counsel, appearances please. Whit Bramwell for the respondent, Your Honor." I stood up. "Whitney Hargrove, Your Honor. Petitioner, appearing pro se." The laugh, like I said, came from Whit Bramwell first. Easton joined him. Brinley covered her mouth. My mother-in-law, who I will never forget for this, actually rolled her eyes. Judge Calderon did not laugh. She tilted her head, just slightly, and looked at me. "Ms. Hargrove," she said, "you're representing yourself." "Yes, Your Honor." "Are you aware that family law proceedings can become quite complex and that you have the right to seek counsel?" "I am aware, Your Honor. I am, in fact, an attorney licensed to practice in the state of California." The courtroom went quiet. I want to tell you what Easton's face did. I have been thinking about how to describe it for a long time, and I do not think I will ever get it quite right. It was not pale, the way the thumbnail of these stories always says. It was the opposite. It was a quick, hot flush from his collar to his hairline, and then it drained out of him in stages like a sink emptying. Judge Calderon looked at Whit Bramwell. She looked at the gallery. She looked back at me. "Bar number Ms. Might Hargrove. 327941, Your Honor." She typed something. She read something on her screen. She looked up again, and this time there was something different in her face. Not warmth, not quite. Recognition. "Ms. Hargrove," she said slowly. "You attended my CLE seminar at McGeorge last October, on asset tracing." "I did, Your Honor." "You asked a question about the second Sweeney case." "Yes, Your Honor." "Mr. Bramwell," the judge said, turning to him, and her voice had cooled by about 20 degrees. "Are you telling me you and your client have just spent the last 40 seconds laughing at a member of the bar in my courtroom?" Whit Bramwell's mouth opened. It did not close again for several seconds. "Your Honor, we had no, my client did not inform me that his wife was an attorney." "Did you ask him?" Your Honor, the asset disclosure indicated she was, that she had not been employed, that'll be enough, Mr. Bramwell. Sit down." He sat down. I have rarely seen a grown man sit down so quickly. Judge Calderon turned back to me. "Ms. Hargrove, you have filed a response and a counterpetition. You have also filed a motion regarding asset disclosure. Walk me through it." I walked her through it. I walked her through the mortgage documents. I walked her through the wire transfer. I walked her through the holding company. I walked her through the 7 years of contradictory tax treatment, which she followed without taking a single note, because she had spent 8 years on the tax court before she came to family law and she understood every word of it. I walked her through the money market account I had been unaware of for the first 3 years of its existence and aware of for the 18 months that mattered. I walked her through the 19 months of transfers to Brinley's account. I did not look at the gallery. I did not need to. I could hear my mother-in-law breathing. When I was done, the judge looked at Whit Bramwell. "Mr. Bramwell, your client's asset disclosure. Would you like to amend it?" He looked at Easton. Easton was not looking at him. Easton was looking at him. "Your Honor, may we have a brief recess to confer? You may have 15 minutes. Bailiff." We took 15 minutes. I did not need 15 minutes. I went out into the hallway. Constance was waiting for me by the elevators, which she had not been allowed to do. But she had done anyway because she knew the bailiff from her prosecutor days. She did not hug me. She just put her hand on my arm and said, "How are you holding up?" "Fine. Imara is 2 floors down. She's been here since 8. "Good. Whitney?" "What? Are you sure about this?" I thought about it. I thought about the suitcases lined up in the garage. I thought about Brinley's hand on his thigh. I thought about my mother-in-law saying we thought it would be easier. "I'm sure." We went back in. Whit Bramwell stood up. He looked, I have to say, like a man who had been informed that his car had been towed and also that his car had been on fire. "Your Honor, my client wishes to amend his disclosure. We would also like to request a continuance in order to provide a more complete accounting." "Denied," Judge Calderon said. "We will proceed with the hearing as scheduled. Ms. Hargrove, you may continue." I did not get to finish that day. I got about another 90 minutes in before the judge called the lunch recess, and I was not surprised. But I was satisfied, because I had laid out enough of the financial picture that everyone in the room understood what was happening. What I did not know, and what nobody in the courtroom knew, was that at 11:30 that morning, while I was speaking, 2 federal agents had executed a search warrant at Hargrove Commercial Properties. They had taken every server. They had taken every ledger. They had taken the contents of my father-in-law's safe, which contained, among other things, a duplicate set of the records I had photographed 3 weeks earlier. My father-in-law, who had not come to court, had come back to his office from his weekly golf game to find his door open and a young agent he had never seen before, sitting in his chair. He had a small heart attack on the spot. He was fine in the end. He spent 2 nights at Mercy General. I sent flowers because I am not entirely without grace. Easton found out at 12:47 when his lawyer's phone rang during what was supposed to be a private settlement conversation in a conference room down the hall. He found out from his brother, who had heard from their mother, who had heard from a neighbor whose husband worked in the building. When we resumed at 1:30, Easton was no longer the same color. His hands were shaking. Whit Bramwell asked again for a continuance. The judge looked at him and said, very evenly, "Mr. Bramwell, you have a man at your table who appears to be having a medical event. I will recess for the day to allow you to seek medical attention if necessary. but I will tell you now on the record that any settlement offer presented to this court at our next hearing should be made in good faith, with full disclosure, and with the understanding that this court is aware of the federal proceedings that have apparently commenced in a parallel matter. She looked at me. Ms. Hargrove, is there anything you would like to add? No, Your Honor, we are adjourned. I packed my folder. I capped my pen. I walked down the center aisle of the courtroom toward the back doors. Brinley was crying. Not for me. She had finally understood, somewhere in the last 20 minutes, that the money in her account was about to be the subject of a federal forfeiture proceeding, and that her cream dress was probably going to look very different under fluorescent lighting in an interview room. She did not look at me when I passed. My mother-in-law did. She opened her mouth. I kept walking. The settlement, when it came, was not so much a settlement as a surrender. Easton agreed to relinquish all claims to the house. He agreed to a buyout of his interest in our retirement accounts that reflected my full contribution to the marriage, which the judge had been ready to find included 7 years of unpaid labor and child-of-record caregiving for his mother during her hip surgery. Although we did not get to argue that part, he agreed to spousal support that reflected the actual duration of our marriage. The money market account was frozen pending federal action, and most of it eventually went into restitution. He pleaded out, in the end, on 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of tax evasion. 18 months at a minimum security facility in Lompoc. His father took a longer sentence because of the duration of the scheme and because his father was less cooperative. The firm was dissolved. The commercial properties were liquidated. My mother-in-law sold the house in El Dorado Hills and moved to a 1-bedroom in Folsom, and as far as I know, she has not spoken to her remaining son, because he gave a statement to the prosecutors in exchange for immunity that included, among other things, the fact that his mother had known about the down payment irregularity for at least 5 years. Brinley pleaded to a misdemeanor. She did not go to prison. She lost her real estate license. The last I heard, she was working as a leasing agent in Stockton. The house is mine. The car is mine. I had the locks changed on a Tuesday in May, and on a Wednesday in May I drove to my mother's grave in Modesto. And I sat with her for an hour, and I told her about the ring. I told her I still wore it. I told her I had used the 1.5 years of evening law school to plan a way out, and that I had taken longer than I should have, but that I had done it. She did not answer me. She never does. But the wind moved through the cypress trees, and that was enough. I keep practicing. I do family law now exclusively, mostly representing women who, like me, were told for years that they were not smart enough or capable enough or wealthy enough to leave. I do not charge them a retainer. I charge them on a sliding scale, the way Constance taught me. Some of them pay me in vegetables from their garden. One of them paid me by repainting my kitchen. I have not remarried. I am not sure I will. But I am not lonely. I am 34 years old. I own my house outright. I have a dog named Junie who I rescued from the shelter on the day my divorce was finalized. And I have a phone that I keep in a drawer most evenings because nobody who needs me would call after 8. Sometimes a new client will ask me how I got into family law, and I will tell her, very honestly, that I once sat at a Sunday dinner across from a woman wearing a cream dress and a husband who told me I could not afford a lawyer, and I made a decision that night about what kind of woman I was going to be for the rest of my life. And then I will ask her about her case, and we will get to work. I think about that Sunday dinner more than I should, not because it still hurts, but because of how clearly I can see now that everything that came after was already in motion long before Easton ever pulled out that empty chair for Brinley. People love to believe in sudden reversals, in the moment the tables turn. But the tables don't turn. They were always going to land where they landed. The only question is whether you spent the years before the landing making yourself smaller, or quietly building the thing that would catch you. I spent 11 years being told I wasn't smart enough to balance a checkbook. And in those same 11 years, I learned to read a federal tax filing, to spot a structured wire transfer, to memorize a safe combination by watching a man's fingers in a mirror. Easton thought he was watching a woman shrink. He was watching a woman compound. That is the part of the story I want women in difficult marriages to hear most clearly. The cruelty you are absorbing is not free. It is being recorded somewhere inside you, and one day, if you are patient and honest with yourself, you will know exactly what to do with it. My mother-in-law thought she was protecting her son. She ended up losing both of them. Brinley thought she was trading up. She ended up in a leasing office in Stockton with a misdemeanor on her record and a real estate license she will never get back. Easton thought a woman without a paycheck was a woman without options. He is folding sheets at a federal facility in Lompoc. None of that happened because the universe is fair. It happened because every single one of them, over and over, chose the easy cruelty and assumed there would never be a bill. There is always a bill. What I want to say about character, though, is harder. I did not become a better person by surviving my marriage. I became a more deliberate one. There is a difference. I had to decide what I would do with the things I had learned, and I will be honest with you, there were nights in that hotel room when I considered choices I am glad I did not make. I did not take anything from the safe. I did not call Brinley. I did not show up at my mother-in-law's house. I let the law do what the law was built to do, and I did my part inside it, and I have not had to apologize to anyone since. If there is a discipline I would pass on to you, it is this. Keep learning when no one is watching. Keep your dignity even when the people around you treat it like a joke, and when the moment finally comes, the one you have been preparing for without quite knowing it, do not raise your voice. Open your folder. Speak the truth in the order the truth wants to be spoken, and walk down the center aisle when it is finished, because that is where you have always belonged.